Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Image of the Invisible. Guys, we have an awesome show for you today. And I know we're going a little bit earlier than we usually do, but it's a very, very special day. And I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So, Phil, how was your week this week?
My week is pretty good. I can't complain. It went by fast. It seems like the year's just flying by and the days are flying by, the weeks are flying by. I can't believe it's already been a week since we were last on, but I'm excited for this episode. We have an incredible guest. But before we get into that, how was your week?
It was good. I had a lot of soccer. For those guys who don't know, I am a middle school soccer coach. And also, my son plays competitive soccer. So, literally, I have soccer every night of the week. And it's crazy. But yeah, and everything was good. Work was good. And then, soccer was good. So, yeah, pretty good week.
That's awesome. No, that's great. I mean, it's always good when you can, I think you've been enjoying the soccer and coaching your son's team and, kind of, being a part of it and stuff like that. So I think that's important and good quality time you can spend with your son and your family and, be a good influence out there and a good coach, I'm sure.
Definitely 100%.
Awesome. Very good.
Yeah.
So who is this episode sponsored by chance?
Oh, yeah. I almost forgot.
Nice.
That's a very important part of the show. Okay, so guys, check out fattack.com for all your tactical needs. They have I cannot think. What do they have?
Holsters,
holsters
and
I was going to say bulletproof vest, but it's not really a bulletproof vest. It's plate carriers. So you have a vest and you put the bulletproof plates inside the vest and you can replace them if they get damaged. They have, oh God, my son just scared me. He's reaching over here and I didn't know he was behind me. That scared me so bad. Rory, go on, buddy.
Need battery.
Okay, so anyways, he wants a battery for his controller. Okay. Anyways, so fattack.com, check them out. They have all your needs, big or small. They have you covered and they have sizes that go all the way up to 5X for everyone who need, you're a bigger guy. And you still want to protect your family and you still want to, have that body armor. They have you covered. So guys, check out fattack.com, like I said, for all your tactical needs.
Awesome. Very good.
That was really funny because I looked down and there's this little arm reaching off my desk. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. It literally looked like you saw a ghost.
Yeah. I thought I did.
Yeah. Too funny. But yeah, we have a incredible interview today with Jerry Marzinsky, who is the co-author of this book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, which we kind of did a little bit of a book review a couple weeks back on it. This book helped me out greatly and kind of put my mind at ease and a lot of things that I was going through and some things that Jason was going through as well. So Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminal insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Jerry is also a commercial pilot, certified scuba diver, long-distance motorcyclist. He has held positions of the second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scoutmaster. He was also awarded the state of Arizona's Tourist Service Award and the Prima College Apple Award for teaching of abnormal psychology. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology, from the Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, 2 years of studying in a PhD psychological program. He is the co-author of the book that I just mentioned. Without any further ado, let's welcome Jerry to the program. Let me pop him up here. There he is. Let's get him center stage. Boop.
Yeah.
There he is. Hey, Jerry, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Doing good. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I loved your book. It really helped me out a lot. So many awesome things in this book. Before we get into it, how about just a quick introduction of who you are, your work, and what led you to write this book?
Well, I spent probably 45 years on the front lines of mental health in several different capacities. So almost every different kind of mental health facility that Arizona has. I spent some time usually years in it. I started off at Georgia at one of the biggest state psychiatric hospitals on the planet. It was Central State Hospital in Milledgeville. That thing sprawled over 300 acres, and it had close to 10,000 patients in there when I first got there. So there was virtually every type of mental illness there that exists. And there was nothing, nothing in my educational background prepared me for that place. I mean, it was just there were, when you got into what was really happening, it wasn't what they taught you. I mean, psychology taught the names of all these different mental illnesses. So this is the name, this is what it looks like, but nothing about what to do for it, other than drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Should I just start off at the beginning and just go? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Go for it.
okay. Yeah, just butt in if you have any questions. So the place was like a sea of insanity. I mean, there were 200 different buildings there. A lot of them were different levels of psychiatric buildings. And, when I got there, I was taught, just like everybody else, that schizophrenia, which turned out to be one of the most, the schizophrenics were usually the most highest functioning of the people in the state hospital. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the majority of them were paranoid schizophrenics. And when I got there, I was perplexed. One thing that I think got me through all this, that I was an adrenaline junkie. I mean, I love that kind of stuff. And, when I got to the front lines, there were several things that popped up that didn't seem to make any sense. Is one of the things they taught us all through school is that the voices that schizophrenics heard were auditory hallucinations. Okay, so when you think of a hallucination, you think of, just garbage, just crazy stuff. Doesn't make any sense. But when I was first exposed to schizophrenics, I could hear them talking to these voices. And it wasn't like verbal, word salad, like I was thinking it was. They were carrying on long, coherent conversations with something that I couldn't see. Yeah. And they were arguing with these things. They were trying to rationalize with these things. They were ordering them away. There were heated conversations between them. There was one lady who was talking to the voices that were telling her to leave the hospital and arguing with them that she didn't want to leave as she was walking off the hospital grounds. So I found that intriguing. But what were the voices telling these people? Well, what I noticed is that the ones who were listening to the voices were the ones that got into most trouble. Okay. And, I'd ask a lot of other people who worked at that hospital a lot longer than I did, is, what are the voices? And all of them said they're hallucinations, and, what are they telling these people? Well, I don't know. They didn't know. And nor were they curious. I mean, here's hundreds of staff there. I never saw even one of them curious about what these voices were telling these people. And there was an obvious correlation between them listening to the voices and they're getting into a lot of trouble. They got into trouble in their classes. They got into trouble with other people. They got into trouble with staff. And listening to the voices. So nobody knew what the voices were telling them. They all assumed that they were hallucinations because that's what they were taught. So I began asking these guys, well, what are the voices telling you? Now, they didn't want to talk about them, and nor did they trust the psychology or the counseling staff, because basically we were snitches for psychiatry. So we were like the people out there on the floors watching the population. And if any of them were starting to get uncontrollable, it was our job to report them to psychiatry. And psychiatry would drug them. You know? Now, you could try counseling with the schizophrenics, but what I found was it was like shooting a rhino in the butt with a BB rifle. It didn't have any impact. There was no reasoning with whatever was going on with them. It wasn't, they might agree, oh yeah, this is bad, but then they'd be back doing the same thing in no time. Okay. So I started asking them, but it probably took 2 years before I learned enough to get them to be able to trust me. First of all, there's no benefit to them in talking about what the voices are and what the voices are telling them. Okay? So they have a lot of bad experiences when they tell their friends about oh, I'm hearing these voices and they're telling me awful stuff. Their friends think they're weird and they back away from them. Oh, you're possessed. They disappear. People start treating them like they're crazy. If they have parents, they tell their parents. They end up in a psychiatrist's office being drugged, and those drugs are awful. They don't cure anything. They just tamp down symptoms. So they might quiet the voices a little bit. They might lower their intensity, but very seldom do they ever get rid of them. So these antipsychotic drugs didn't cure anything. Okay? And then what the psychiatrist would do, if the patient kept complaining about the voices, they'd increase the drug or change the drug, but it was always something to do with the drug, okay? Which it didn't cure anything, and neither did the antidepressants. That just tamp down symptoms. So those drugs would basically turn these people into zombies. They didn't like being zombies. They couldn't think straight. Their vision was blurred. Sexual function was altered. They felt all drugged up. The side effects were horrendous. They're just awful. So the hospital staff would basically use these drugs to control a massive population without having to have a lot of staff there to do it. Okay? That was one of the big things that psychiatry found when these drugs first showed up, and they snatched onto them right away because there was a battle between neurology and psychology going on, or psychiatry, and psychiatry was losing. They weren't providing any benefit to anybody until these drugs showed up. So when these drugs showed up, they grabbed them. I mean, that was their province. So after a year, after I started asking these guys what the voices were telling them, I'd get piece by piece. I might get a piece here from one of them and another piece from another one a month later. And a couple of months later, I'd get another piece. And I'd start collecting up all these pieces. And then when I called them in, I'd say, well, I know this much about the voices, which was much more than any of the other staff knew. Tell me more, And when they saw that I was really trying to learn what the voices were, they would give me more information about them. They could sense that I was really serious about them, and that unless they were an imminent threat, I wouldn't turn them into psychiatry. I'd just kind of work with them. So piece by piece, these voices started showing patterns. Okay. And the first pattern was they were consistently negative. They wouldn't tell the patient anything good. It would be stuff like, you're no good, you're ugly, you're awful, you're stupid, you're ridiculous, you're worthless, you're ignorant, nobody likes you, just go ahead and kill yourself. It was all negative stuff. Okay. And in the few instances where they did say positive stuff, they turned around, they stabbed them in the back with it. What they were trying to do is get them to trust them, and then they would hit them in the back with it. So they were totally untrustworthy as guides, and these schizophrenics kept getting into trouble. Listen to them over and over and over. And I'd ask them, I said, well, you realize they're lying to you. In a lot of cases, they realized that they were being lied to. And I said, well, why do you listen to them? And I remember the the report of one patient. He said, because they're so damn believable. You know? So the first pattern that came up was that the voices were consistently negative. You know, I'd seen a number of hallucinations by the time I got to this point, and they were random. They're all over the place. You couldn't predict what a hallucination was going to do or say. Yeah. But the first pattern was these things were negative. My question was, why aren't they random? Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why are they consistently negative, and what is holding them on such a negative pattern? What holds them within the confines of that negativity? Why aren't they all over the place like all other hallucinations? I didn't have any answers. All right. Now, in the meantime, you know, I'd ask the psychiatrists, I asked the psychiatric nurses, you know, what causes schizophrenia? You know, they spit out the same garbage that they were taught in medical school and you know, their graduate schools. Oh, that's caused by chemical imbalance in the brain. And that's what they're telling these patients. You know, they go in to see the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist is telling them, you know, you got a chemical imbalance of the brain. Your brain is broken. There is no cure. The only thing you could do is take these, you know, toxic medicines they were offering for the rest of your life. Very hopeless message. You know, so here they are already confused and paranoid and you know, depressed and just kind of like in the pits of hell. And here's a psychiatrist comes along and says, no cure. You know, it's a life sentence. All you can do is take these awful drugs for the rest of your life, you know, which added more, you know, to it. It was just a really negative situation. But then when I started watching what these psychiatrists were doing, is they would bring the patient into their office, and I'd be in there with them a lot of the time. They'd ask them a few questions, maybe 15, 20 minutes. They'd come up with a diagnosis just off the top of their heads, and they'd start them on some drug. So I'm like, okay, where's the baseline? You know, what chemicals are out of balance and by how much? How do you know if you're just ask them a few questions and then you start them on some drug and then you switch it around or increase it, decrease it? You know, what's out of balance? They had no baseline. You know, and I'd ask them, well, how do you know what's out of balance? They said, oh, the drug companies figure that out for us, and we just give them the medications. You know, so there existed no objective test to measure which of the patient's neurotransmitters in their brain were out of balance or by how much. Okay? This was a lie made up by Eli Lilly in the 70s when Prozac came out. They didn't have any explanation for how their drugs worked, their antidepressants or the antipsychotics. And they needed to look like they knew something, that they knew the cause. I mean, they're treating something, so they need to know what the cause is of the treatment, supposedly. So Lilly just made up this biochemical imbalance stuff, just made it up out of thin air, you know, and then started publishing it that, oh yeah, these antidepressants work because it corrects some kind of chemical imbalance of the brain. So then Big Pharma picked up on it and started advertising the same junk. And then Big Pharma, which controlled the universities, they control the medical schools, they control the doctoral programs. They had them start teaching this lie in the universities. So all the people that I was working with around me believed this lie. Okay? And I did too when I got there. But there was no evidence for it. You know, there didn't exist an objective test to measure what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. You know, they would just subjectively pick a drug, you know, and go, well, we'll try this one, see how that works. If that didn't work, they'd switch to another one, or they adjust the levels up and down, back and forth. It was always some drug. And what was interesting is that, you know, these drugs did keep them sane, because one of what these drugs were, for the most part, were major tranquilizers. So you got somebody who's paranoid and anxious and fearful and just emotionally wrung out, and you give them a tranquilizer, it calms them down. Okay, those drugs didn't get rid of the voices, but it calmed the person down long enough to be able to function in our reality. But seldom got rid of the voices. So what I found odd was that eventually virtually every single one of those patients would go off those antipsychotic drugs. And one of the things I saw that perplexed me when I first got there, I was doing rounds on the first floor of this big psychiatric unit, and there was a maintenance man. He was cutting the bottom cap off of a big pipe banister that ran from the first floor of this psychiatric unit up to the second floor. Now, on the second floor, there was no cap. Okay, I noticed that, and I went, well, that's odd. All these other ones have caps. I didn't think anything of it. So here I was walking through the first floor, and here's all these patients watching this maintenance man cut through the steel banister. And there were sparks flying all over the place. There was smoke. It was the most interesting thing going on at the moment. So I just joined the patients, and we were all watching this maintenance man cut the cap off this banister, watching the sparks fly off in the air. And it was like a small little, fireworks display. And then when the cap fell off, thousands of pills, psychiatric pills, came flowing out of this banister, just came gushing out of this banister like a rainbow, what do you call it, gumball machine or something, like you win the lottery or something. They just hit the floor and they just spread out all over the place, and there were thousands of them. So these patients in this psychiatric unit had been dumping their medications down that banister for decades, maybe even more. There were thousands of these pills fell out of there. And I remember thinking to myself, after examining, a lot of them were antipsychotic drugs. It was like each one of these pills is a vote for a psychiatric patient to return to insanity. I'm like, what's with that? Why do they want to return? Why do they want to get crazy? Why do they want to go back to insanity? It didn't make any sense to me. And on my caseload, it was only a matter of time that when the schizophrenics were ordered these antipsychotic drugs, eventually they would go off them. Okay, so at that point, I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So what we were trying to do was pick the highest functioning out of all these psychiatric units, train them in some low-level skill like barber, cosmetology or auto repair or janitorial work or something, and get them out of the hospital and get them working. But in order for them to stay sane, they had to stay on the drugs. All right. So there was like a rule that if they went off their drugs 3 times while they were with us, they weren't going to take them when they got out, because we are handing them to them every morning, saying, here they are right here. They don't have to go anywhere to get them. They're just dished them out to them. And if they couldn't stay on them when they were being dished out to them, what's their chances that they're going to go out of their way to go to a mental health center or a doctor on the outside, pay a lot of money to get these things, and make the appointments and all that stuff that's involved with it? It's virtually nil. Okay? So here these patients that are doing good in their classes would just mysteriously go off those drugs, and then they would go psychotic, and I'd be called from my office to go down and get them and bring them back to the ward because they were upsetting the class, or they were babbling or throwing things or insulting people or assaulting people or whatever. The instructor would call me, hey, this guy's going, he's lost it, come on down and get him, bring him back up to the ward. All right. So I started wondering, why are they doing this? Why are they going off their drugs? Okay, so I started asking them. And of course, the main excuse they gave was that the side effects of these drugs were absolutely awful. and indeed they were very, very bad. I got a list of them here somewhere, but they virtually turned these people into zombies.
Mm.
You know, there was sexual dysfunction, their eyes blurred. Okay. Well, here's one for SSRIs. You know, the ones for antipsychotics are worst. You know, so it's nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headaches, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, seizures, and it just goes on. And the antipsychotics are even worse.
Mm.
Okay,
Jeez.
so they're awful drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not abusable drugs, which is nobody in their right mind wants to take these drugs. They're not recreational drugs. Nobody who's crazy wants to take these drugs, and yet psychiatrists have clamped onto them with steel fists and will not let go of them. You know, and require them to come to the psychiatrist to get a prescription every month to stay sane. Okay, this is what happens in the community. Okay? So it costs about $800 to $1,000 for these people, schizophrenics in the community, to stay sane on these drugs. Right? So, you know, they have to go to the psychiatrist. So there's an office visit for $200, $250. It costs about $800 to get these things if you don't have insurance. So you're talking close to $900, $1,000 for a schizophrenic to stay sane who doesn't have insurance. You know, who can afford that? You know, a lot of these guys can't work. So, you know, they're not going to have the insurance. And yet the psychiatrists are gripping them. Now you go across, I live 60 miles from the Mexican border here. You go across the border to Mexico and you can walk into a pharmacy and you could get these drugs over the counter. You can get them for $75 instead of $800, right? And often they're made by the same manufacturers as here. Now you can go to a psychiatrist over there. He'll give you a diagnosis. He'll say, okay, I recommend this drug. You go to the pharmacy and you get it, right? No. So the whole thing, you know, might cost you, you pay $100 for the psychiatrist, and then you don't have to go back to him again because you don't have to go to him to get the prescription. You just go to the $75 a month compared to almost $1,000 a month in the U.S. Now you talk about a freaking racket.
Yeah.
These guys got a scam going, backed by the big pharma to the max. Now you can't bring those drugs across the border because big pharma has bought off Congress not to allow it. You know, and then they run these ad campaigns. Oh, well, the Mexican drugs aren't as good as our drugs. They're not made the same. They don't have the same tolerances, but they work. You know, so it's a scam. And then you wonder why the U.S. medical costs are totally outrageous. You know, because we're paying 10 times more for the same medications than Europe or Mexico is paying. Because the big pharma has bought off Congress to make laws that benefit them, not us. All right. So you got that going on. So we had like a three strike rule. If you go off your antipsychotic drugs 3 times, you go psychotic 3 times, we're going to discharge you from the program. Okay. So I started wondering, you know, why they were doing this. And what didn't make sense is that the psychotic symptoms, I mean, what they were going through while they were psychotic looked a whole lot worse. I mean, even though the side effects were bad, it looked a whole lot worse than the side effects of these antipsychotic drugs, right? So, you know, you have demons chasing you, you're paranoid all the time, you have nightmares, you know, you hallucinate people laughing at you. You hallucinate people are trying to kill you. They're looking at you through the window. They're following you. I mean, it's just an absolute paranoid nightmare. I mean, it's like hell on earth, you know. And I'm going, okay, the side effects are bad. No doubt they're bad, but being psychotic is worse. Okay. So what I did is came up with 2 questionnaires, and every time a patient went off his drugs and went psychotic, after he was reconstituted, after he was back on his drugs and he was sane again, I started questioning him. I went, you know, why did you go off your drugs? You know what was going to happen. This is, this is the second time, or you've done this before, and you know what's going to happen. Did you want to go insane? They go, no. Well, why'd you go off the drugs? Well, because of the side effects. The side effects are awful. I said, I know they're awful. But what I did was came up with a check sheet of all the negative traits of being psychotic. The hallucinations, the nightmares, the paranoia, the voices mocking you and not letting you sleep, seeing monsters. I mean, all the horrible things that go along with psychosis. It's like hell on earth. And I'd give them a blank sheet of paper and I'd say, write down the side effects of all your antipsychotic drugs. So they didn't all have the same side effects. They reacted to them differently. So they put down, 5 or 6 side effects. And then I'd give them that check sheet of all the psychotic symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. I said, check the ones here that you've experienced when you went psychotic. And they checked this whole bunch of them. And they were much worse than the symptoms of the antipsychotic drugs. And I'd hand both sheets back to them and I'd say, which one's worst? And they said, well, the psychosis is worst. This went on for 3 years. Every time I asked them why, if being psychotic is worse than the side effects of the drugs, why do you keep going off the drugs? Guess what their answer was? 3 years of the same answer. Matter of fact, more than that.
Yeah. Was it the voices told them to
it
go off?
Well, they would say at first, I don't know.
Mm.
That was the answer I got. I don't know. It took 7 years to get to the point where what the voices were doing. Okay. That was at the end of 7 years. Remind me, and I'll tell you, because that's kind of the conclusion of the state hospital thing. All right. So it didn't make any sense, why they were doing that. It just didn't make any. So it was another puzzling piece that I had no answer for. So here's this giant puzzle in front of me, and I'm looking for answers, and I'm finding these pieces that didn't make any sense by themselves. So now you have there's patterns starting to form, and those patterns kept coming out. So the second pattern were one day, one of my patients came to me and said, yeah, the voices came last night and I prayed the 23rd Psalm and they squealed. They hated it. He said that they acted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. And I said, well, that's interesting. So I started asking other patients. I asked them, what happens when you pray? What happens when you go to church? What happens when you read the Bible? Turned out that the voices didn't like any of those things. They were staunchly set against them. So, I started asking questions about church, and there were plenty of schizophrenics there to work with. So I started asking them, what happens when you go to church? And what happened was if the voices were weak, they would shut up when they went into a church. If they were of moderate strength, they would start picking up and they'd start getting louder and more boisterous, and they would block the patient from hearing what the preacher had to say. They would just get louder, and then they'd start mocking the preacher and saying stuff like, Jesus Christ couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you? Stuff like that, saying you're wasting your time in here. If the voices were very strong, they would drive them out of the church. They would just jump up and run out of the church, like demons were chasing them, which probably was the case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I found that interesting. And then I started handing out the 23rd Psalm to the patients on my caseload and said, repeat this when the voices come and let me know what happens. It was always a negative reaction. The voices didn't like it, So here I'm thinking like, well, what kind of hallucination would be anti-religious? Why no other hallucination was anti-religious? Why is this one anti-religious? And it was consistent among hundreds of schizophrenics. They were always negative. They were always anti-religious. And the third facet I found was they would consistently create and foster negative emotional energy. So the kind of garbage they would tell these patients, you're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're worthless, nobody likes you, your parents don't even want you around, nobody can stand you, that kind of stuff, 24 hours a day, and then urging them to kill themselves. Okay. So what I found was that after these voices left, these patients were drained of all their energy. They didn't have any energy. I had one guy said, the voices attacked me all night, and I was just laying there, in the bed, and I felt as exhausted in the morning as if I were digging ditches in the hot summer heat all day. So that was consistent also, that there was an energy drain somewhere along the line. Now, I didn't know how that happened, but I started asking more and more of them, how do you feel after the voices leave? So I came up with a 1 to 10 scale. How much energy do you feel you have before the voices attack you, and how much energy do you feel you have after the voices attack you? All right. It was always consistently lower afterward, and I believe we ran an analysis of variance on it at one time, and it came out statistically significant. So something was going on there. Their energy was being sucked from them somehow. They didn't know how. I didn't know how. But there was a 1-to-1 correlation between the voices attacking them and their energy levels disappearing. Okay? So they somehow energetically drained their victims. Okay. Another pattern they had was they get louder after sunset. So when the sun goes down, the voices got louder, they got stronger. And I'm like, why would that happen? But it was a consistent report from these guys. Okay. They got louder when ignored. So, there were a few times where I was sitting in the psychiatrist's office with one of my patients, and they would tell the psychiatrist about, the voices telling them all this stuff and bothering them, and the psychiatrist would go, well, they're just hallucinations, just ignore them. Okay? So I would ask the patient later, I said, how'd that work? The psychiatrist told you to ignore the voices. How'd that work? They said it didn't. They got louder. They got more boisterous. They got more insistent. And then questioning scores of others, the same thing happened to them. They will not be ignored. If you try to ignore them, they get louder. They get more persistent. And another one was they foster self-destructive behavior. So they'll tell these patients, don't do your homework, don't go to class, don't take your medicines, don't talk to the staff, don't follow through on what you say you're gonna do. Go get in a fight with this guy who the voices are saying are abusing you. So all the advice these voices were giving them was to destroy them, to get them in trouble and to destroy them. I mean, and that was consistent too. All right. So these were all set patterns. Okay. Now, if you go to my website, and this is for you psychiatrists and psychologists out there, and anybody working with schizophrenics, go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, go to articles, and pull up this list of patterns that these voices are running, and ask them and see for yourselves. It's right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is look. They run 23 fixed set patterns. Okay? If they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. All right. So, what are they? Well, they're negative, and you would ask a lot of the patients. You'd ask, well, what are they? They didn't know. I'd say half didn't know. The other half would say they're demons. So let me see what else I learned there. This happened to me. This was interesting. When I started asking the patients what the voices were telling them, one of them got upset because his voices got upset. They didn't want anybody poking into their business. And he went and told one of the psychiatrists for the rehab building I was working in that I was asking him questions about his voices. All right. The next morning, I got called up to that psychiatrist's office on the red carpet, and here he is going, "You will not ask these people about their voices, their hallucinations, and by asking them about their voices, you are making them worse because you're reinforcing their hallucinations by acting as if they're real and asking them questions about it." And he ordered me not to ask any questions about these voices. That was one. That happened the second time with another psychiatrist later. So I think I'm pretty sure what the psychiatrists at the state hospital, they were intimidated by these guys because they were being assaulted by schizophrenics at a rate higher than any other doctor out there. They were being assaulted by schizophrenics higher than physicians' assistants, psychiatric nurses, counselors, psychologists. They, and back then, Milledgeville was in the middle of nowhere, so they had their own food factory. And back then, we didn't have cell phones; we only had the dial-up phones. So, the what do you call it? The gossip wire was in the cafeteria. And you'd hear about this psychiatrist got attacked by a schizophrenic, and then another got attacked by another, and another, and another. It was fairly common. So I think the psychiatrists were a bit afraid of these people, And what was strange, they weren't attacking psychiatric nurses who were actually handing out these medications to them. They were attacking the psychiatrist who was prescribing them to be given to them.
Yeah.
Okay. And for years, I didn't know what was going on there either. It was another piece of the puzzle. So here I have these pieces that just won't fit together, and it was driving me crazy because I didn't have any hard answers. So here's a bunch of lies that I was taught in college. Here's a bunch of lies that the psychiatrists are being taught by the drug industry as they went through the medical school. Here's the whole foundation that schizophrenia is caused by a chemical imbalance was a total lie. So here they are operating on lies with no substantial research. There was no research into the voices. You couldn't go type in or do a search and, oh yeah, they're auditory hallucinations. That's what you're going to get. But they hadn't done any research on them at all. They hadn't asked any questions. Their opinion was what that psychiatrist did to me. They're hallucinations, and don't you dare question this. Don't let me catch you questioning this or acting like they're not. So it was a threat. So I had to drop down into first gear the rest of the time I was there at the state hospital. So I spent 7 years there. The seventh year was interesting. There was this one girl doing great in cosmetology class, getting good grades while she was on her medication. She was about ready to graduate. And these things would always sabotage them when they were about ready to graduate. When they were about ready to succeed, the voices would somehow jump in there, or they'd stop taking their meds, and then they would fail again. All right. So this girl was one of the good students in cosmetology, and then I got called down there one day because she was totally out of control. She was psychotic, and she was screaming in one of the corners, upsetting the class. Had to haul her out of there, take her back to the psychiatrist, get her remedicated, and that was her third time. So we were preparing to discharge her because, if you can't take your meds here, you're not going to be able to take them out there. You're not going to take them there, So I informed her mother that we're about to discharge her, and her mother went berserk. She virtually begged me not to do that because she couldn't handle her at home. She needed her to complete her program so she could at least work in a cosmetology setting and keep herself occupied and try to try to take care of herself. So, I felt sorry for her, and she said, I'll come up there and we'll find out why she stopped taking her meds. We'll find out. I said, okay, great. Now I'll have somebody else questioning her beside me. So, that Friday she came up, she drove up from Central Georgia, which is a long way off. And, we're sitting in the office talking, and then we brought the student in, and both of us are asking her, why did you go off your meds? Why did you stop taking your drugs? You know what would happen. You've done this, more than 3 times before. You knew you would go berserk if you stopped your meds. Why did you do that? She said, you wouldn't believe me. And I told her, well, try me. I've seen some really weird stuff since I've been here. I've heard some really strange stories. I don't think you're going to tell me anything that's going to shock me. She said, okay, all right, I'll tell you. She said, the voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And they pointed to the side effects of these drugs to say, listen, look at what you're feeling. Your eyes are blurred. You're sluggish. You can't think straight. All those nasty side effects, pages of side effects. See, the psychiatrist is poisoning you. Here's the evidence. Soon as I heard that click, the reason all those psychiatrists were being assaulted was for the same reason.
Right.
They were the ones prescribing the drugs. They were the ones that were making these people take the drugs. Everybody else was just a stooge. They were at the beck and call of the psychiatrists. They were, nurses who were handing out the drugs, or psychologists or counselors who were watching over the population and spotting the ones who weren't taking the drugs. It all centered around drugs. So that made sense. The side effects weren't the only reason. And you see all this stuff happening on the streets, these psychotic guys that are, get an AK-47 and shoot up a school. Most of them are mentally ill people, So how well do those drugs work? They virtually don't. All they do is tamp down the symptoms. They cure nothing. So now we have more psychiatrists, more psychologists, more psychiatric drugs on the planet than ever before in the history of mankind. And yet we have almost 50,000 people in the U.S., this is just the U.S., who commit suicide every single year. You got 132 people kill themselves every day, reported by the CDC. Suicide's the 11th leading cause of death in the United States.
Dang.
Suicide between 2000 and 2018, suicide rates increased 37%. Between 2006 and 2016, the suicide rate increased 2% a year, with 1.4 million suicide attempts in 2017 and 47,000 deaths. Okay?
Wow.
This is how well the Western mental health system is working. That's based around these chemical garbage that they're feeding these people. And on top of that, they found that in autopsies with state hospital patients who've been on these drugs for years, they do autopsies and found that their brains were shrunk like walnuts.
Gosh.
So the researchers who did that, wrote up papers to report, hey, this is what we're finding. Of course, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma saw those and screaming bloody murder. First of all, they won't allow that kind of information to be put into the Journal of American Medicine or any of the major journals. They would not fund them if they put that kind of stuff in there. They would not fund any school who did research into that. But thank God there's some honest researchers around. So they started screaming, oh no, it's not our drugs, it's the schizophrenia that's doing this. The schizophrenia is rotting their brain out. So these researchers went, okay, let's find out. So they started feeding these antipsychotic drugs to mice, monkeys, and rats, and found the same thing happened. So not only do these drugs not cure anything, they're actually destroying the person's central nervous system with long-term use. Now, I'm not to say that there's not reasons to give these drugs. Believe me, I've worked in a state prison for 18 years in the psychology department, worked in the state hospital. There are some people that you can't control in any other way than to douse them down with these drugs. Otherwise, they're just too friggin' dangerous. But for the average guy, for the average schizophrenic, you feed these drugs to them for years, you're doing neurological damage to them. Now, of course, they won't tell the patient that. It's not going to be printed in any of their journals, but the research is out. So not only are they not really helping or curing these people in any permanent type fashion, they're doing neurological damage to them. And what they did at the state hospital is when they started showing symptoms of neurological damage, like the hand shaking and the tongue darting, instead of taking them off these drugs or lowering them to something else, they would give them Cogentin, which masked the symptoms of those drugs and allowed these drugs to continue destroying their nervous system, while the patient didn't feel it.
So I got a question. Excuse me. So I was, you see all these, documentaries and stuff about state institutes and hospitals back in the 50s and 60s, probably even before then. So pretty much the medicine is kind of like a medical lobotomy, like pharmaceutical induced lobotomy is essentially.
Well, a lobotomy is what they did is they took an ice pick, stuck it up in between their eyes, up into their prefrontal lobe cortex.
Yeah,
it's the early psychiatrists. This is and they scramble their brain. They scramble their prefrontal cortex.
Yeah,
I met one of those guys at the state hospital, and I remember my reaction then. It was, this guy isn't quite human, and I couldn't put my finger on it. He would answer questions, but there was something really wrong.
Yeah.
But that the medicines, I mean, like for the really bad patients, it's essentially what it's doing is just kind of numbing that part of the brain where they just, kind of are numb to all that. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Well, it turns them into a zombie. It numbs them out.
Yeah, kind of like a lobotomy, correct? Like something.
Well,
similar.
Lobotomy they're very different.
Yeah, I know they're different. I'm just saying.
One is chemically doing it, but the damage isn't all of a suddenly, where they scramble the brain. It's a very slow process.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of like that, but the symptoms of the neurological symptoms when it comes to the chemical side effects is a settling, like you're constantly nervous.
Mm-hmm.
You get this Thorazine shuffle,
mm-hmm.
where they would just shuffle their feet. They couldn't walk in a normal gait. They just shuffle. They can't think straight.
Mm-hmm.
Because their cognitive function is starting to be rotted out.
Yeah. So something similar, and my son's not schizophrenic, but he has ADHD, and they put him on medication, and he started a tic where he picks his fingers, and he will pick his fingers down to where they bleed. All of his fingers. He doesn't have fingerprints on them right now. I mean, we took him off the medicine, but still, it's like it's there. It's never going to go away. So.
Yeah, those ADHD drugs are amphetamine.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. Oh, they're amphetamines. They're you got Ritalin. That's a Adderall. They're all amphetamines. And working at the prison for 18 years, there was a lot of prisoners came in that started off on Adderall and Ritalin, and then moved up to amphetamine.
Wow.
Went nuts on amphetamine and ended up in prison. I've seen more prisoners go insane on amphetamines than any other drug. It's like it opens them up and it lets these things in.
Mm.
So where I went from this, so I went back to graduate school for a couple of years, and at the end of 7 years of working with schizophrenics, I had these pieces of the puzzle that just didn't fit. I mean, I knew they were valid pieces. I had no explanation for a lot of them, and the schizophrenics were driving me crazy. I was like, I got to get away from these people. They're driving me nuts. So I went back to the PhD program, and it was just like they said, piled higher and deeper.
Mm.
These after 7 years on the front lines at the state hospital, what these people were teaching was it was nothing to help. Nothing that they were teaching was going to cure anybody. It was like, okay, these are the names of these mental illnesses, and that's another thing I found was, they didn't say that back then. This DSM, this Bible that they were teaching, it was like a Bible in the doctoral program, the PhD doctoral program in psychology. The DSM was their Bible.
Mm.
It was this list of all these mental illnesses and the different subsections of these mental illnesses, and you had to memorize large sections of this tripe. I didn't know it at the time, but every single one of those is made up.
Really?
There is not a single objective test for any of the 500 or so that are in there now. No, it's 300, I think, now.
Wow.
Let me see. DSM. Here, let me see if I can find some stats on that. Here's what a Network Against Psychiatric Assault wrote this. He said the new diagnostic Bible, the DSM-5, labels almost all human emotion as a mental illness. A child who talks back, who spends too much time on the internet, a woman who grieves the death of her husband or child for more than 2 weeks are all labeled as mentally ill and told they need to be drugged. Unhappiness is labeled as depression. People are encouraged to numb themselves with drugs instead of dealing with life situations that are causing their unhappiness. Over 2/3 of the psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-5 have financial ties to the drug industry.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's like that old saying, you follow the money.
Yeah.
Follow the money, and it's like the one psychiatrist went out and said the DSM is a complete work of fiction. He said every single one of the more than 296 psychiatric disorders in the DSM-5 and later have been completely made up by a group of psychiatrists, 2/3 of which are tied in with big pharma.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you talk about the deep state of mental health, this is it.
Yeah.
It's psychiatry, it's big pharma, it's the drug industry, and how these things were grown. In 1952, there was 106 psychiatric disorders. In 1980, there were 256. Now there's 297. So they're fabricating new ones all the time.
Yeah.
And not one of those 297 mental disorders has a defining diagnostic lab test. Not one. There's no objective test to test for any of these. There's no blood test. There's no lab test. There's no x-rays. These are just classes of behaviors that a group of psychiatrists have voted to be a mental disorder. And that was said by a psychiatrist himself, Dr. Julian Whitaker.
Wow, that's crazy.
And then this 25% of college students have received a diagnosis of some kind of mental disorder. 25%. So some of these diagnoses are crazy. Now they have what is it? Caffeine. Well, they got mathematics disorder. Okay, so if you hate math, you're disordered.
Oh my gosh.
So
That's
I
ridiculous.
am. I got mathematics disorder.
Yeah.
Caffeine intoxication. You drink too much coffee, you've got a psychiatric disorder.
I got it right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be on steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Caffeine disorder on steroids. Sibling relational disorder. Okay, so you got a couple of kids fighting with either two brothers fighting with each other. That's a disorder. Sexual orientation disturbance, homosexuality, Florence syndrome. You get this one. Being overwhelmed by the beauty of Florence, Italy. The symptoms are fainting and dizziness. The treatment is antidepressants. Get this crap. Look at this garbage. And they're serious about this.
Yeah.
Paris syndrome. Mostly Japanese patients visiting France.
Yes, I've heard this. Yeah.
Yeah. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecution. In my day, that would be called cultural shock.
Yeah. Right.
Now, if you get a group of 10 psychiatrists in a room and you give them a semi-complex set of symptoms and ask them to make a diagnosis, you're going to get 10 different things. There's no objectivity to any of this garbage. None of it. And the labeling, especially schizophrenia, it's a devastating label. It'll carry for life on your medical records.
Yeah.
So I blew out of that doctoral program because it was worse than I'd ever seen before. I could feel them molding my brain to think like they did, and I didn't want to think like they did.
Yeah.
My experiences at the state hospital didn't match what they were teaching. All right. And I was getting increasingly more depressed and more insubordinate toward them. Finally, it was like I couldn't take it anymore. I hit the ejection seat. Came down to Tucson, Arizona, and worked in the biggest mental health center in Tucson for a few years. Worked in the hospital emergency room doing psych crisis at one of the county hospitals. And then a job came open at the state prison in the psychology department. So I took that. Okay. Now that's where I learned the most. Okay. The prison was full of schizophrenic prisoners. Okay. So they don't take their meds. They do meth. They go crazy. They can't work. The only way they can support themselves is by robbing and stealing and selling drugs. All right. So they're ending up in prison by the hundreds.
So okay. do they take like the meth to kind of calm the voices in their head? Is that one of the reasons?
No.
Okay.
The meth makes the voices worse.
Okay.
Oof.
Yes. It somehow spiritually opens them up to the voices.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah.
They called meth the devil's drug.
Mm.
You go to any prisoner, you say, "What's the devil's drug?" and they'll tell you it's meth. I've never seen so many people go psychotic on any single drug than meth.
Jeez.
And here they are giving this stuff to the kids.
Yeah.
Back in my day, we were all crazy. We were all running around the room and couldn't wait to get out for recess and go run around. And a lot of those guys had been started off on Ritalin and Adderall. Not all of them, but a number of them. Okay, so I found myself surrounded by schizophrenics again. I was like, oh shit, here I am back in the cauldron. It was like, it was like some big hand took me and said, where do you think you're going, buddy? You had your break. You had your 2 years of higher, psychology education. You saw what that was. Now get back here. So it's like back in there again, surrounded by schizophrenics, and I had all these pieces of the puzzle, but one thing was majorly different is I had access to them for virtually as long as I wanted to. I mean, there was work that the system required you to get done, but what I was able to do was form these groups of schizophrenics who were willing to tell me in real time what the voices were telling them. Okay, so here we'd be sitting in a session, and they would say, well, the voices are telling me this. They're telling me that you're stupid, you're crazy, don't listen to anything you say, that you're just a total jerk, stuff like that. And I'd tell them back, well, go tell them to stick their heads in the toilet or something. Be that kind of stuff. Okay, so I worked in the prison for 18 years, and there's 18 years of investigating the voices. Okay, and a lot of the prisoners were just as interested in what these things were as I was. So I brought the little pieces I had with got from the state hospital, pieces of the puzzle, and that helped a lot, because when I started asking questions, and I'd say, well, I know this, and I know this, and I know this, and I know this, and I know this and this, what else can you tell me? It was like they'd see that nobody else in psychology knew that much stuff, and it fit in with their experience of stuff. So they went, oh, here's somebody who partly understands, and they volunteered to go in those groups. So what I would do is I'd give them assignments, once a week. I'd see them once a week, and I'd give them the 23rd Psalm. Say, when the voices come, read the 23rd Psalm, come back and tell me what happened. The reports were always negative. The voices hated the 23rd Psalm. Then let me see what else. What else? There was a bunch of other stuff. They didn't like sunlight. They did. Let me see what else. They didn't like preachers. They didn't like any kind of religious services. And there was one. It was really, really interesting. I had one schizophrenic who he was kind of like a macho guy with a kind of a slight sense of humor to him. He would mock the voices. He would make fun of them. He'd call them names. He would mock them. He'd put them down. They hated it. They absolutely couldn't stand it.
That's interesting.
So, they wanted them to be terrified. They wanted them to be afraid. So here I was finding out thing after thing after thing through these assignments. So I'd always have, maybe 15 to 17 inmates who were psychotic that I was working with. And every time I got something that the voices hated, I would tell them to do more of it. The 23rd Psalm. I bring up that they were liars. Don't believe anything they say. They're liars, and all this other stuff. So one by one, here they're coming back with all this information, and the voices were reacting in the same way to all this stuff. So I was figuring, okay, what can I do to throw a monkey wrench in these patterns that the voices are running? Right? So I give them these homework assignments, and then a few weeks later, they all started coming back and going, the voices don't want us coming here. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like these exercises that you're giving us. They're telling us not to come, not to show up, but they all did, because a lot of them were just as curious about these things as I was. Where it got a little hairy was, every once in a while, one of them they'd run into trouble. There's one guy ran in trouble with one of the guards, one of these macho guards, and the guard kind of insulted him in front of a number of other prisoners, which was a no-no.
Yeah.
That's a big no-no, So this guy, he comes back in, he's hearing the voices. The voices are telling him to stab this guard. All right. And, it's like, it was like walking on a razor's edge. If I turned this guy in for telling me that the voices were telling him to stab this guy, they'd probably lock him down and medicate him until he was drooling at the mouth, and none of these other guys would ever say another word to me. Right.
Right.
So I just had to watch him. I had him come in like every day, every other day, and just kind of kept an eye on him until he bubbled on down. But we hit those kind of situations periodically. You know? So one day, one of the guys I was working with, he comes in, and after we finished our session, he turns around in the doorway and he says to me, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just look at him like, what? Never crossed my mind. I'm thinking, well, they're in your head. They're not in mine. They can't come out. Little did I know. So I just added that to the list of, puzzle pieces. I'm like, okay, what's that about? I had no idea. He didn't threaten me. He just said, what you're doing is dangerous.
Yeah.
I was poking in the heads of psychotics, but I never had any of them threaten me. They were, the voices would get upset, but they wouldn't. They kept them in check. I also gave them the option. I said, if the voices get so bad, just walk out of here. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to call the guards. Just go. I'll call you back a week later. I never made them or forced them to do anything. So a couple of weeks later, let me see, what was the second thing happened? Another one came and he knocked on my door without a pass. I don't know how he got into the medical unit without a pass. Knocked on the door, I opened the door, and he goes, "The voices want to talk to you." And they want to talk to me personally? That had never happened before.
Yeah.
Right.
20 years prior,
Jeez.
that had never happened. All conversations took place between me. So I'd tell the patient would tell the voices would tell the patient would tell me. So I was, the patient was the in-between guy. I was never spoken to directly by them. Okay. So he said, the voices want to talk to you. I said, they want to talk to me personally? He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. And I'm like, whoa, what's this about? I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on here. So I bring him in, close the door, to have a seat. What do they have to say? These words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. My head went boom. Up until that point, I was denying that these things were entities of any kind. I was thinking, I didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
And I had overwhelming evidence that they weren't hallucinations. They were something else, but I didn't want to believe it. When he told me it wasn't him, and after he said that, he said, that wasn't me. That was them. They said that. I didn't say that, and I went to give him a response. I said, tell them this. And he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can see you and they can hear you. I never thought about that either.
Yeah.
And so it was like a double whammy. It was like bam, bam. And I was like, I got out of there and it was like, do. It was like, Outer Limits.
Right. Yeah, sure.
I was in shock. I closed my office and I canceled all my appointments for the day and just sat there and stared out the window going, what am I getting into? Where's this going? It's starting to get a little spooky. So, but I didn't stop. I was, this is the adrenaline junkie part that comes through. So I kept working with these guys. A few weeks later, I brought in a book. It was The Voice of Knowledge by Miguel Ruiz. He's a South American shaman. So he was talking about these things being parasitic entities. And one of the guys I'd been working with for 6 months, I would bring in everything. I would ask them questions all the time. I'd just bury them in questions and ask them questions about everything. And they would answer them to the best of their ability. I didn't have any psychiatrists breathing down my neck saying, you can't talk to these guys. And some of those sessions went on for 3 hours. The other psychologists are wondering, what's he doing in there with these guys? They couldn't even stand being in there with him for 20 minutes. Here I was talking to them for 2 and 3 hours at a time. So I brought that book in, and I outlined the paragraphs where this shaman was talking about these things being energetic entities that siphoned off the victim's behavior. And I told the patient, the prisoner, I said, I brought this in. I want to read you this paragraph, and I'd like your opinion about what this guy has to say. So I started reading, and I got down to the point where it was talking about these things being energetic parasites. And here's this loud electrical crackling burst out behind my head. It sounded just like a, what do you call it, an arc welder. It was that loud. And I turn around, I don't see anything. And then the thing starts moving from behind me over to the right wall of my office. And I'm like shocked. Well, what is this? And I look over at the client or the prisoner, and he's just sitting there staring at me with this blank, weird stare. And I'm like freaked out between this look on his face and this crackling. And then it starts moving up the wall at a 45-degree angle toward the corner of the far left corner of the office. And I look at this guy and said, "Do you hear that?" And he doesn't answer. He just sits there and he's staring. And I'm going, he's going to attack. So I pushed my chair back against the back wall so at least I could kick him back. They only had female guards in the medical unit at that time. They weren't going to be of much help. All right. So here's this crackling continues. It goes up to the top of the office, and I'm switching my attention between him and this crackling. I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I just hear it. It's very loud. And it must have lasted for 5 or 7 minutes. It wasn't a short thing. It wasn't just a short blurb. It just kept going. And then it cut across the top of the office near the ceiling. And I could see him, and I could see where the noise is coming from, but I couldn't see anything else. I could just hear it, and it was loud. And then it starts coming down the left-hand wall, and I'm still watching this guy, and he's got this glazed-over look on his face, just like a zombie. And this thing comes down, and it's getting closer and closer to me, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can near my left leg. So I bend over, and I look in there. There's nothing in there. Not even a piece of paper. The inmate porter had cleaned it the night before, and it was completely empty. And yet this thing was crackling in there, and I saw nothing. And then it went, doom. It was done. It was gone. And I look over at him like, okay, what's going on with him? And he slowly gets up, and he goes, "I gotta leave." And he gets up, and he shuffles out of the office and disappears down the hall. And I'm like, yeah, get out of here. Go. Yeah. I was so shook up. I didn't call him back for 2 to 3 months.
Wow. Yeah, I don't blame you. I
was going like, what? I don't know where it was going. I have no idea where this is going. I have no cognitive map of this thing or whatever it is. And nothing has ever prepared me for this.
Yeah.
So finally, after 2 or 3 months, I finally got enough nerve to call him in. And I thought he would be a wreck. If they could do that, if they could drive him to do that, they must have had some kind of really strong control over him. And he shows up in my doorway, and he's looking good. He has plenty of energy. He looks good, and I'm shocked. I said, hey, you look good. I was expecting you to be a wreck. He goes, "No, I'm doing fine." And I said, how are you doing with the voices? And he said, "Well, I'm doing what you taught me. I'm able to hold them off, but I'm not able to beat them, but I'm able to just hold them steady. They're not making any ground with me." And I said, "Have a seat." We did some small talk, and I said, "You remember the last time you were in the office here?" I said, "Did you hear that crackling?" And he said, "Yeah, I heard it." He said, "But I was surprised you did." And I'm like, I said, "What was that?" He said, "That was them." And I said, "Them who? The voices?" He said, "Yes, that was the voices." And I said, "Well, what in the blazes were they doing?" He said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did a damn good job of it, you know? And then I looked at him and I said, you looked like some kind of stunned zombie when you walked out of my office that day. I said, what were the voices telling you as you left? He said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut. You know, and I'm thinking, he wouldn't do that. You know, I've been working with him for 6 months. He's made some good progress. He wouldn't do that. And I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you do it? He said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one. You know, and I'm like, ooh, you know. So it was, this is what that fellow meant by, you know, it's getting dangerous.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
You know, I didn't stop working with him. We found things that we could do to weaken these voices that allowed the person to fight back. But one of the big things that was found was that once they realized that these voices weren't them, that their mind wasn't broken, that these were entities coming from somewhere else, right? That made all the difference in the world to them. You know, it's like, okay, so it's not me. Now I have an external enemy that I can fight back against. That I don't have to fight against me, and I don't know how to fight against me. I don't know how to do this, you know. And taking these friggin' toxic drugs aren't working. That's not helping. You know, it drugs me down, turns me into a zombie. It lessens the voices, but they're still there. They don't go anywhere. You know. So these things are energetic entities. They're what you would call demons.
Yeah.
If you go and you look at the rest of these patterns, it's the same patterns that the demons follow in the Bible. You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, Jesus cast demons out of the 23 times in the Bible.
Yeah.
And what happened today? I mean, the churches don't even talk about that. Yeah. Nobody talks about demons.
Yeah.
You know?
Even like the Catholic, the exorcist. Yeah, I couldn't get that. Even the exorcist, they'll go and they'll do a psychiatric evaluation before they even would perform an exorcism. And if they're like, oh, they're schizophrenic, they won't even perform an exorcism on them.
Oh, that's crazy because it's the voices that are causing the schizophrenia. Now there's a bunch of different types of schizophrenia. But paranoid schizophrenia is the one I'm talking about, and it's the most prevalent one. Okay, and those voices are entities. You know, they're demonic entities. They come from the outside, and you know, I never found a prisoner who wasn't brutally, psychologically, emotionally, or sexually abused that brought on these voices or the drugs, the amphetamine. Okay, so what they do, they're like sharks in the ocean that smell blood. You know, they'll circle around and they'll attack these wounded animals, you know, so they attack wounded human beings, you know, and they don't just hit schizophrenics, they hit all of us.
Yeah.
You know, you could be walking down the sidewalk and here's this horrible thought just shoots through your head, drive into the opposite lane of traffic or jump off that bridge, or, you know, what would it be like to jump off the bridge? Or I had one guy wrote me, he says, well, you're right. I was standing behind my boss the other day, and the voice came and it said, "Spit on the back of his head." You know.
Right.
You know. So we all hear them.
Yeah, I hear them.
You know.
I've heard them.
You know, nowhere in psychology or psychiatry do they ask about where thoughts come from. You know, they just assume that if you have a thought, it belongs to you. You know, now Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic who lived 300 years ago, who was given access to heaven and hell and could go talk to these demons on that side. He said, you know, virtually none of your thoughts come from you. They either come from the dark side, they come from heaven, or they come from hell.
Yeah.
You know. And you know, your brain or your mind is like a radio receiver. You know, it tunes into the frequency where you're at. So somebody who's been horribly sexually, physically or emotionally abused is that are already at a very low frequency. You know, they're thinking negative all the time. Right? And you can't force that dial up. It's almost like if you try to force it up, the voices jam it back down again. Okay. So the first thing that schizophrenics need to understand that these voices are not them. They don't come from them. They're not coming from a biochemical imbalance of the brain. There is no such thing. It's been disproven. It's a lie that the psychiatric mafia, the cabal of the psychiatric world has made up for their own benefit, for their own profit. Okay? That the voices are not hallucinations. They are entities. And they run very specific patterns. And again, you could see all those patterns on my website. Okay? There's 23 of them. Okay? They're running patterns. They can't be hallucinations. Psychiatry, psychology, Big Pharma has not done any research on the voices at all. It's almost like the ancient Egyptian priests of old. They just get up there and go, we hereby proclaim that the voices are hallucinations because we said so. You know, well, what do you got to back that? Nothing. We said so. So that's the way it is. You know. So they had no research to back what they're saying. Okay. And if these guys are going to win the battle against these things, they have to understand that these voices are coming in from outside of them, not inside. They hear them inside, but they don't have to buy what they're talking about. So again, Sherry Sweeney, my co-author who wrote the book, the Voyage into the Psychotic Mind, she beat these things with a program that she wrote called the That's a Lie program. Okay, so what most schizophrenics do is they try to resist these voices. You know, I'm not listening to you. This is full of crap. I'm not gonna do that. It's constant resistance, and that wears them down. Okay, so it's a constant fight, constant wear down. Okay, now if they believe what the voices tell them and they act on it, then they get in more trouble. Okay, so what Sherry found was that these voices are consummate liars. I knew that at the time when I met her too. I knew her for 10 years before she admitted to me that she was schizophrenic at one time. You know, and she doesn't like that word. You know, she goes, no, these were intrusive thoughts, but that's what they are. They're voices. Okay. And she realized that they were liars. And so what she did is that she saw them as a illegitimate program, and she would say, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. Okay. So when she realized they were lies, and she would tell the voices they were lies, they lost their power because they have to get the patient to believe the garbage that they're telling them that's scaring them half to death in order to get control over them, because they operate by fear. They want you to fear them. You know, that's why they call it paranoid. They don't call it paranoid schizophrenic for nothing. Right. And you know, if you look at this list of patterns and you look at the garbage that the mainstream media has been putting out to us over CNN and NBC and the rest of them, it's the same patterns, the same exact patterns. You know, negativity, fear, lies, you know, duplicity. One for one, they're virtually the same. So that tells you something. Right.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. So yeah, because one thing I did want to mention, because you mentioned it in your book, you talk about how paranormal investigators who do EVP sessions have run into the similar kind of problems where they can't shut off these voices that they communicate with during their investigations, and it kind of like and eventually will follow them home, or they have issues and stuff. Because that's what happened to me, because I used to be a paranormal investigator, and then these voices didn't stop. And so then they followed me home, and then they became, you know, internalized voices instead of voices through the recorder. So I think that's another interesting aspect of this that some people don't realize it, or in that field, or people that have communicated with, you know, used Ouija boards.
Well, Ouija boards are very dangerous. They're very dangerous. I can't emphasize enough how dangerous those things are. You know, I've worked with several people who've gone psychotic using Ouija boards.
Yeah, I am not surprised. I am not surprised, especially I think when you open yourself up to whatever unseen voices that you're communicating with, you can't control who's going to respond back. And I think
No,
that's
and you
I
don't
think
know
that's
who
the
they
issue.
are.
Yeah, and that's the
You don't
problem.
know what they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had something. This happened several times when I was working with a prisoner who completely recovered from schizophrenia, and I have some transcripts here from one of them that I was working with. This is an interesting story. When they completely recovered, okay, that night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would be crushed down into my bed, and it was terrifying. Something was actually crushing me down into the bed.
Wow.
And I started praying like crazy, and it would eventually lift up. But it happened every single time one of these guys was free of their voices.
Really?
So
Wow.
whatever this thing was, it knew where I lived. It followed me home, and took its revenge on me that night, and that was terrifying.
Yeah,
I was like, where is this going? So it was weird. I had one foot in each world, and there was a period of time where I thought I was going crazy.
Right.
There was nobody I could talk to. Here's all this stuff. The only people who understood were the schizophrenics themselves. I could talk to them. They understood, and they understood me. They understood that world better than I did. But there was nobody else sane that I could talk to until I met Sherry, my co-author. And it took her 10 years to tell me that she had heard voices when she was a young girl. All right. And we got together and we got to let the world know about this. They have to know. And it took us 2 years to write that little book. It was agonizing.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing book. It's a great tool and a great book. I thought it was just awesome, all the information you have in there. So I'd recommend anybody go out there. If you have struggled with voices, or even if you haven't, or you know someone that has, or even if you haven't, I think it's a great book and a great tool to read and kind of to able to understand all these different things that you talked about tonight. Because I think it's very, very important, and it's a spiritual battle.
Yeah. So
it is a spiritual battle.
Yeah. Yep.
I've dealt with it like my whole life. You're not good enough. You're fat.
Yeah.
You're ugly. No one likes you. I've dealt with that my whole life. And now that I have kids, it's like, you're not a good father. There's a constant battle. But I think there's a point to where, you give into the voices, or you fight them yourself.
Yeah, you have to fight back against them.
Yeah, I got laid off from my job, and that was one of the worst it had ever gotten. Where you can't provide for your family. Why don't you just leave? All this stuff. So yeah, I've totally.
So I've been searching for more effective ways to work with schizophrenics and people who have psychological problems my whole life, and then. What they teach you in graduate school, what they teach you in doctoral program doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You try to use those things on alcoholics or schizophrenics, you may as well be, spitting in the wind. It's garbage. It's just pure garbage. Then one day, after I got my my private practice started, I got an email from a fella that I didn't know, and he said, I have somebody that you need to meet. And at worst, she'll just be a jolly old lady, And I'm like, well, that's interesting. That's very different from the kind of emails that I usually get. He wasn't asking anything for himself.
Yeah.
So I wrote him back and I said, okay, what's going on with this? He goes, I got somebody you need to meet. And it turned out that he was a MACE practitioner. Now, I hadn't heard about MACE before then. What it is an energetic psychotherapy. It's pure energetics. It's not like anything traditional at all. It works with energy. Okay, so your thoughts are energy, your mind is energy, your spirit's energy, your memory's energy. You're an energetic being. And what psychiatry is doing is trying to change that energy or that thinking or that mental illness with physical drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in the province of physical drugs. What they're attempting to do is like you get a strong magnet and you dump these antipsychotic drugs on the magnet and you expect the magnetic field to disappear. It doesn't go anywhere. It might gum up that field, but it doesn't get rid of that magnetic field. So mace works that same way. And it turned out that the lady he wanted me to meet was the chief trainer for this new cutting edge psychotherapy. So I was fascinated. And I went and I read the books and I kept touch with her. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm going, this guy's onto something. Like he's onto something. So I started using my understanding of it with the clients I had, and it was working. It was actually permanently getting rid of psychological problems that these guys had. And I only had the tip of the iceberg. So, I kept carrying on conversations with Cherie, and she said, well, why don't you take the course and become a certified practitioner? And I go, well, why should I do that? It's working now. She goes, well, all you got is the tip of the iceberg. So, I completed the 6-month training course, and my God, the results that we're getting with this is outrageous. I mean, it's just, I've never seen anything else work like this. People come in with all kinds of trauma, an hour later, it's discharged. I mean, these, sexual offense, sexual assault, horrible things that happen to them. And in an hour, they still can remember what happened, but there's no emotional reaction to it. It's like it's neutral. Okay. And there's only 50 of us on the planet right now, but it's spreading.
Yeah.
Okay?
I wonder, because, you referred to them as energetic parasites.
Yes.
I wonder if that's disrupting or, like kind of like a cleanse you would do for parasites, in your stomach or intestines. It's kind of the same thing. It's like a cleanse, energy cleanse.
Well, I've been using it with schizophrenics, and it does help. If it doesn't get rid of the voices, it weakens them. But what it does do is gets rid of all the garbage that you have inside from all this bad stuff that's happened to you previously. They no longer can feed on that. So because they are energetic beings, they can go into your mind, they can go into your memory, and they can bring up every rotten thing you've ever done and rub it in your face until they generate that negative energy that they feed off of.
Yeah.
So what they do to us is the same thing we do to cows. You put them out in the pasture, you feed them the grass, they eat the grass, they produce milk, you bring them in, you isolate them, and you milk them, and then the whole thing goes again. That's the same thing these things are doing to us, to schizophrenics.
Yeah.
So the mace is it's almost magic, from what I've seen. So there's a number of cases where it actually got rid of the voices. If it doesn't get rid of the voices, it gets rid of the garbage that they feed off of.
Yeah.
Okay? But it works better than anything else I've ever seen. Okay. So you guys who are listening, before you consider any of these toxic psychiatric medications that these people are going to want you to take if you go to a psychiatrist, please go to causisminstitute.com and find yourself a causism therapist. That's CAUSISM Institute, INSTITUTE.com. Okay. There's more information about it on my website. We have some videos on it. We have some interviews with MACE therapists. It actually gets to the cause of the psychological problem and gets rid of it. It doesn't just tamp down symptoms. Okay. So what I have here, if we have time, I have one inmate who had a real interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely.
This guy completely recovered. Okay, so we worked with him for, 6 months, a year. He completely got rid of the voices. So he had a huge prison record. I mean, he had pages and pages of a rap sheet, all this stuff they'd done, drugs, robbery, assault, and just went on for pages and pages. But he wanted to do something about the voices. And in these sessions that I was telling you about, I would meet with him and he would tell me about stories about his voices. So he's telling me one time that he was in San Diego and the voices told him to get 2 burlap sacks, a machete, and take all his money, and that they would show him where a Sesamelia pot field was in Oregon. You know, and I'm listening to this, and I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "Well, I went and got the burlap sacks and the money and headed on my way up to Oregon." And the voices were telling him turn by turn where to go. Just like this, kind of ghostly GPS. And he followed their instructions all the way up to Oregon and then onto a 23-mile dirt road. And then the dirt road ran out. And he asked the voices, he said, "Okay, what do I do now?" And they said, "Get your sacks, bring your machete. There's a hiking trail off to your left. Just go into the woods a little further up there, and you'll find a hiking trail." And they said, "Just keep following that up until you run into the pot field." So he said it was probably a couple hours he walked up that trail, and then he came to this huge clearing, and there it was, this massive Sesamelia pot field, just like the voices had told him. And he cut down a bunch of the pot, put it in the burlap sacks, and then he asked the voices, he goes, "What do I do with it now?" And the voices said, there's a federal park not far from here. Go there and sell it. So he went there and he sold it. He made hundreds of dollars. And I said, "Well, what'd you do with that money?" He said, "Well, I bought myself new fishing rods." He said, "I bought all the prostitutes I wanted. I bought all the cocaine I wanted. I bought all the alcohol I wanted." And he said the voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. And I told him, I said, "You're pulling my leg, man. This is already an incredible story, but now you're going too far." He said, No, honest to God. They were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. He said, "We went out to the Columbia River. They told me where to throw my hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move to another spot." He said, "I was the only one catching fish that day. Everybody else out there wasn't catching anything." He said this went on for about 3 weeks. Once a week, he would go back up to the pot field, and he would cut down more pot. And then on the 4th time, when he ran out of money, he ran out of pot, he said, "Okay, I'm going up there again." The voices said, "No, don't do it. They're waiting for you. They're going to kill you. If you go up there, you're a dead man. They know somebody's been cutting their pot. They know somebody knows about it. You go back up there, you're going to be a dead man." Okay. So he went back home to San Diego with hundreds of dollars more than he had. Mm-hmm. So I have some transcripts from him when we were working in session. I'm going to kind of read them to you and bring you into that session. This took place in 2002. Okay. So we are investigating the voices. And I asked him, he starts off, he says, "The voices have started coming back once a day now." So the voices were going from constant to now we had them down to once a day. Okay. He said, "I can feel them in the wings." He said, "They start by whispering, 'How are you?'" And I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I completely ignore them and start praying. I don't talk to them at all. I totally ignore them." He said, if you give them any recognition at all, then they got their foot in the door." Mm. And I asked him, "How long does it take for them to go away once you start praying and asking for help?" So, Swedenborg says everybody has 2 guardian angels. They can't help you unless you ask. Okay. So one of the things I'm telling these guys is you got 2 guardian angels. They can't help you unless you ask them for help. Okay. And there was one guy where he stopped asking them. The voices came back. And I said, "Well, you were doing good the last time I saw you. What happened?" He goes, "Well, I stopped asking my guardian angels for help." I said, "What'd you do that for?" He said, "Well, I just kept forgetting to do it." And I said, "Well, they probably got bored and they left." Mm. And I said, "When's the last time you heard them?" He said, 2 months ago. I said, "Well, ask your guardian angels right now. Ask them to come and get rid of these voices." And he did. And he said the voices disappeared. Mm. All right. So I asked him, how long does it take for the voices to go away once you start praying? They hate prayer. They hate the 23rd Psalm. They hate the 91st Psalm. He says about 15 minutes. I asked him, how about the fits they usually throw when you ignored them? Do they go ballistic on you? He said, "No. I have to give them the time of day before they can get into throwing their hissy fits. I asked, do you have a whole lot more peace in your life than you had before? He said, yes, much more. I asked him, do you miss the voices? He said, nope, not anymore. I used to. They used to be more a part of me than I was. I asked him, are they the same voices you've been hearing for years? Do they change? He said, nope, they're the same ones. They don't change. I asked, how many voices continue to come now and visit you? He said, 2. I said, is that the same number as before? And is it more or less? He said, it's 1 less. I said, was the one who disappeared the weaker of the ones? He said, no, it was the strongest one. And I was surprised. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, what do you think happened to him? He said, I've been praying on a regular basis now. It seems the strongest one just couldn't stand the constant prayer. I said, have you forged a better link with the positive spirits? He said, yes. The demons try to disguise themselves as good spirits. So a lot of these guys hear good ones and bad ones. And that's what Swedenborg says is going on. There's a battle between the negative and the positive. The negative ones speak in words. The positive ones more speak in feelings and intuition. And sometimes they can hear them talk. But that's a lot rarer. I said, what do the good spirits do for you? He said, they help me pray when the bad spirits come. The prayers get louder inside, and I overcome the bad voices. I said, what kinds of things do the good spirits tell you? They tell me to be appreciative of what I have, and I'll get more. They tell me to study, to stay in prayer, and to give thanks for what's around me. Okay. I have another 2-page transcript. Do you want me to go on, or do you want to stop here?
No, sure. If you got the time, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I got the time. Let me grab my glasses. This is small print. I'll be right back.
No worries, no worries. In the meantime, I'll plug his book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. There it is right there. Great book, great read. Highly recommend it. It's available almost anywhere. We'll ask him before he leaves where he prefers people to buy it. Sometimes people, they wanted to buy it in certain spots, and
yeah, sometimes their publisher may have a direct link or something.
Yeah, exactly. And they get more money that way. And not only that, I also did a mace session with Jerry as well, which is like I said, is a form of therapy. It worked really well for me. I think it's something that's very interesting and very awesome for anyone out there that's interested.
Okay, now I can see the small print. Let me see what the date on this is. So this one's later. This is the first one was 8/2002. This one it's 10/25/2002. So but you know what? This is the date's wrong, because this comes before this last one. It actually comes before. So I put this inmate comes to the unit from another prison with a diagnosis of psychosis. When I called him in, he appeared to be thin and nervous. It was clear that life had beaten him down, and he looked haggard. He was thin and hesitant to speak. I asked him if he was on psych meds. I knew he was, but it was a place to start. He admitted to it. I asked him, do you hear voices? He said there was a guarded response, no. I could tell that he was not telling the truth and that he was getting progressively more nervous. They're always worried that people like us are going to turn him into a psychiatrist and they're going to be drug silly.
Yeah.
Right? So he's getting nervous about it. He doesn't know me from Adam. I said, it says here on your record that you did hear voices at one time. I said, when did they start? He said, when I was 13. I asked him, did they start suddenly? And he said, pretty much so. How did they start off? And said, it's obvious that nobody up to now had spent any time trying to find out what his world was like. And he eased up a little, lowering his guard just a bit. See, they don't ask him these kind of questions. Said, after all, we're talking about his past, and he knew I had the record. He said, they started off telling me to do little things. Did they eventually work up to telling you to do bigger things? He said, yes. I had one prisoner tell me they started off by telling me to go pick up a pencil. to go sit down in a chair. It's like somebody getting a new car and trying to figure out how to drive it. You know? I said, what were the things they worked up telling you to do? He said, well, mostly they told me that other people were going to hurt me and to watch out for other guys. That's a common tactic. That's why they call it paranoid schizophrenia. They're out to get you. They're watching you. They're watching you in the windows. They watch you wherever you go. They're waiting for a chance to attack you. I said, what did they do if you ignored them? He said, they got louder and louder. Okay. So this is another affirmation that you can't ignore them to start off with. You know, they just get louder. And I've had scores of patients tell me the same thing. He said, if I kept ignoring them, they got angry. They have not ever gone away for any length of time since they first came. Okay, so all the medicines he's been on, all the psychotherapy he's had, all the times in jail, never affected this. So here's where we have, 50,000 people killing themselves every year. These drugs that they're using, the entire Western mental health system is a fraud. It doesn't work. It just drugs these people up, turns them into zombies. It doesn't cure anything. They have no cures. MACE is the first thing that's come out that will cure psychological disorders. All right. And I asked him, so I said, how did it try to, he said, they constantly bothered me. He said, I tried to kill myself 2 times. So they drive these people to such distraction that they think the only way out is to kill themselves. And the voices tell them to do that. Okay. And, I used to wonder for a long time, well, they're killing their food cow. They're killing their source of food, of energy.
Right.
Why are they doing that? And then I got an email one time from a guy who heard voices, and he said, this is what's happening. When somebody kills themselves, everybody in their family and everybody around them feels guilty for not helping them out. I could have done better. I could have helped him. I could have done this. I could have done that. It's my fault. All right. So now it's like throwing a rock into a pond. That wave just spreads out. And now all these people are feeling rotten instead of just the one.
Yeah.
Wow.
I said, how'd you try to kill yourself and what happened? He said, both times I tried to hang myself. He said, one time I went way out into the middle of the deep woods, about a mile from the nearest road, and I hung a rope on a tree. He said, there was nobody around. I put the rope around my neck and I was hanging when a hunter appeared out of absolutely nowhere and cut me down. I said, what did you think about the timing of that incident? He said, it was a miracle. I said, did you get the feeling that someone or something was watching out for you? He said, yes. I said, who? He said, God. I said, do you believe in God? He said, yes. Did you make any other suicide attempts? He said, yes. I said, what happened? He said, I tried to hang myself in my garage. And what did you hang yourself with? He said, a nylon rope. I said, what happened? The rope broke. That was the second time it broke. I said, was it a thick rope? He said, no. It was a regular thickness rope, but it was old. I said, have you ever been sent to a psych hospital? He said, yes, twice. So he had been on medications forever, and they hadn't helped him at all. I said, are you hearing voices now? He said, sometimes, but the medication keeps them down. Okay. So it lowers them. They're not as intense, but it turns the guy into a zombie. It doesn't get rid of them. I asked him, can you tell the difference between the voices and your own thoughts? He said, yes. See, because a lot of these guys believe that the voices are their thoughts. Okay. So they have to differentiate between the two. The one good way to do that is by their intent. The schizophrenic voices don't have a good intention for the person at all. They're always telling them negative stuff, do this bad thing, say this bad thing, do stuff to get you in trouble. The intent is always negative.
Right.
Okay? And I asked him, can you tell the difference between your thoughts and theirs? And he goes, yes. I asked him, who are they? He said, the voices. Do the medications and the psychiatrist give you weaken them? He said, yes. I said, are they still there? He says, yes. Then they come as thoughts. and not as voices from outside me, like when I don't take the medication. So what's interesting about these things is when they're very strong and they feel they have the patient or the schizophrenic under their control, they move outside of their heads and talk to them from a locus outside of their heads. And that's really spooky.
Yeah.
That's really scary, because then they know that there's something that isn't their thoughts there.
Right.
And there's nobody they can talk to about it. Nobody can listen to this. They think they're just completely nuts. And if they tell the psychiatrist, he'll dose them down with so much medicine that they're drooling.
Right.
Yeah. He said, yes, then they come as thoughts from outside my head. When I take the medication, they move inside. I asked him, can you still tell the difference between them and your own thoughts? He said, yes, but it's very confusing. Okay. So that's a battle that they all have to face. Which thoughts are theirs and which thoughts are coming in from the outside. And what's interesting is they sound exactly the same as the person's normal thoughts.
Yeah.
There is no, we are the voices, nothing different like that. They sound just like the thousands of thoughts that run through your mind on an average day. Only the intent is very different. It's always negative. Okay. So he says it gets very much more confusing when they move inside. And I said, what do they tell you when you're on your meds and they're not coming from outside your head? He said, they tell me the people are out to get me and that those people want to hurt me. Same stuff, paranoid garbage. They're out to get me. They're going to kill me. They're watching me. They're hiding in the closet. They're following me. I said, and when you are off your meds and you listen to what they're telling you to do, how do they behave when you do something they tell you to do and you get in trouble for it? He said, they laugh at me. They tell me I'm stupid. That's very common. When they get the person in trouble, they laugh at them and mock them for being so stupid as to listen to them. The worst I've ever heard, and I've heard this twice, where they told the patient, if you gouge out your eye, we will disappear and we won't come back. The guy gouged out his eye, and what they did, they showed up right back after he did it. They started laughing at him and mocking him and calling him stupid, saying he was now a freak. People would avoid him, that he was now ugly, he was a monster. They started laughing at him and making fun of him. Jeez. That's what we're dealing with here.
Right. Jeez.
So that's very common when they actually do listen to these guys and they get in trouble. Then they start laughing at them, call them stupid. It's another pattern that they run. And I asked him, they mock you and laugh at you for what you told them to do in the first place? He said, yes. And I said, what do you think these voices are, or what do you think they are? He goes, I don't know. I said, what's your gut feeling as to what they are? He says, demons. Okay. So they know at some level that these things are bad. Now, this guy was very interesting, not only for his story. He would tell me that his mother, in the sessions we had together, he would tell me that his mother would come and visit him once a week. And his mother was dead. Right? And I was very suspicious of that, because if they can take the form of anything they want to, an uncle, a grandmother, whatever they can, because they have access to your mind. So they know information about that person that nobody else would know, because they get it from you. They're energetic, so there is no time, space, or matter for them. Your thoughts are energetic and they can read them. Okay. So I would ask him about his mother every time he said she came. And I'd ask him, what does your mother tell you? He said, oh, she tells me to wear clean underwear and wash my socks and stay away from the gangsters and don't do scams for money and store, stay away from the drug dealers, the stuff that mothers would say.
Yeah.
And, like every time he told me his mother came, I would ask him, well, what did she tell you? And it was just mother stuff, there wasn't anything negative about it, so I stopped worrying about her, because I figured if she would have made a move by now. This went over months. And then when his voices left and he was back to normal, he wasn't hearing them anymore. One of the last sessions I had with him, he said, my mother wants to talk to you,
Mm.
me. And I'm like, well, that's odd, you know? And I'm like, where's this going? With that other thing from, that other. So I sat back and I said, well, what has she got to say? And he says, she wants to thank you for helping me.
Hmm.
And I said, you're welcome. And I asked her, I said, what are you doing over there? She said, I'm checking people in. And I went, that's interesting. And I went to ask her another question. And she said, I'm not supposed to be talking to you. Everything you need to know is in the Bible. And then that was it. She was gone. And about 2 weeks later, he hadn't heard from her for like 3 weeks. She had disappeared. So now that she knew he was okay, she had left to do whatever she was going to do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Whatever they do over there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's very interesting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
No, awesome stuff. Thank you again for coming on and joining us. I mean, just everything you said was great and really important. So I just want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Yeah,
I have some people I could bring on with you at another time if you'd like. One is a lady who was psychotic when she was younger. She attempted to kill herself a number of times. She talks about the voices and what it was like to have to experience them and what it was like to be in the depths of psychosis.
Mm.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Incredible.
I have another one who was she was a nursing student, but she could hear, she could see spirits all her life, ever since she was little. And when she was a nursing student, she did a shift on a psychiatric unit, and she could actually see these things, what they looked like.
Gosh.
And she actually she pulled some off of one person. She's got a very interesting story to tell too.
Yeah, I would love to hear that.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I could arrange that at another time. Right now, I'm just booked solid until April.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'll reach back out to you in an email, and then we can set that up for whenever you have for some free time.
Yeah, sure. Be glad to. You guys have any questions?
I think you answered pretty much all my questions I was gonna ask you through everything that you said. Unless Jason, you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
Like he said, you answered pretty much all, and asked some questions already. But it's just fascinating, and it's amazing how much like biblical truth there is.
Yeah,
and people don't realize it because they're stuck in their like scientific mind and won't open to the spiritual side,
right. See, and that's one thing about Mace. It's got a spiritual component, and it won't work without it. And here's psychiatry, totally in the physical, in their heads. Psychology is the same thing. There's no spiritual anything here. We're spiritual beings, and they're treating you with physical drugs. It especially, your mind is energy, your thoughts are energy, your spirit's energy. You're an energetic being. Physical drugs don't cure mental problems. They may drug your physical body down. They may turn you into a zombie. They may make you lethargic and drugged down, but they don't cure anything. I've seen people who were just a mess, a total mess, come out of there an hour later, the issue completely gone.
Yeah, that's awesome. So again, Jerry's book is An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. Is there any specific place that you want people to buy this book? I know it's available on Amazon and a bunch of different places, but is there
Amazon gives us very little in return.
A
pittance. If you buy it off my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, we get a bigger return on it.
Awesome, cool. And where can people basically everyone can find out all the information about you on your website, your May sessions, your book,
right?
All your stuff. If you want, just plug that one more time, and anything else you want to plug, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, it's jerrymarzinsky.com.
There you go. Yeah, so go check it out. Buy his book. Check out the May sessions if you are so inclined. If you need one, highly recommend it. And thank you again, Jerry, for joining us on this Sunday, and we'll look forward to future discussions with you.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. You have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
All right, cool. What an awesome episode. Probably
Yeah.
our longest episode to date, but couldn't ask for a better guest, a better episode today. Just awesome. Just absolutely awesome. So we'll be off next week and we'll come back on the week after.
Mhm.
I'm not sure who we'll have on or if it'll just be us, probably just us, but yeah, anything else that you wanted to bring up? Oh, we got one last comment here. Great episode. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for checking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great episode. Awesome. Yeah. Anything else? Why don't you plug Fat Tack one more time?
Yeah, guys, check out fattack.com for all your tactical needs. They have you covered from plate carriers, holsters. They have awesome t-shirts. I designed the t-shirts, so you can check them out. There's some new t-shirts out there right now, which if you go to our Instagram page, make sure you follow us, like us, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Also, I'll be posting some of the new shirts this week because I think they're pretty cool. There's
Awesome.
one, because the whole Fat Tack thing is, it's for big guys. So I made a new shirt. It's really funny. It's an American flag with the stiff stars. It's got a cheeseburger.
Oh, I love it.
It says red, white, and blue cheeseburger.
Nice. I know. Speaking of t-shirts, we got to get an Image of the Invisible merch going.
Yeah, we do.
So yeah, that'll be coming down in the future for sure. But other than that, I hope you guys have a good Sunday and we'll see you week after next.
Peace.